I'm a 28-year-old guy, and for the last 5 years I've had a tradition. Every year, I plan and pay for a weekend getaway with close friends and family to celebrate my birthday. I book an Airbnb months in advance, organize the whole itinerary, and make sure everyone has plenty of notice to take time off. It's always a highlight of the year, good food, good company, and no stress. My older brother, Alex 32M, has always been the kind of guy who finds a way to make everything about himself. Growing up, our parents constantly lumped us together because his birthday is just 3 days after mine. It was always a shared celebration, which as a kid I tolerated. As an adult, not happening. The moment I had control over my own plans, I made sure my birthday was my own thing. This year was no different. I booked an amazing lake house back in August for a trip in January. Everyone RSVP'd months in advance, including Alex. He even seemed totally fine with it, no complaints, no passive-aggressive remarks, nothing. I figured maybe, just maybe, he was finally learning to chill. A week before the trip, I was grabbing drinks with a friend who casually mentioned how excited they were for next weekend. I was confused. My birthday trip was this weekend, not next. I asked them what they meant, and they looked at me like I was the confused one. The Airbnb got rescheduled, right? Alex said the trip got pushed back. My stomach dropped. I hadn't changed anything. I immediately pulled up our group chat. Sure enough, there were messages about a reschedule that I had somehow missed. People were talking about flights and adjusted plans like this was all normal. I checked my Airbnb booking. My heart nearly stopped. The reservation had been moved to the following weekend, and I hadn't done it. I messaged the Airbnb host right away. They confirmed that the reservation had been modified by a family member who had access to my login details and had even changed the account's contact email. Once the email was switched, all notifications went to him instead of me. There was only one person who could have pulled this off. Alex. I went back to the group chat and asked, who changed the Airbnb dates? A few people responded, saying they thought I had. Then Alex chimed in. It just made more sense this way. No big deal. No big deal. I called him immediately. He didn't even sound guilty. He just casually explained that since his birthday was closer to the weekend anyway, it was more efficient for everyone if we just combined celebrations. Dude, this was my trip. I paid for it. I planned it. Yeah, and it's still happening. Just next weekend. No need to freak out. I was fuming. I asked him how he even got access to my Airbnb account, and he just laughed, saying I always use the same password. I told him to change it back. He refused. By this point, the group chat was blowing up. Some people were confused. Others were pissed. My younger sister, Emily 25F, was the first to call him out. You can't just steal someone's trip, Alex. What is wrong with you? Our parents, of course, jumped in to defend him. It's not that serious. Just celebrate together like you used to. No one cares about whose birthday is on which day. Yeah, no one cares, except me, the person who planned the entire thing. At this point, I wasn't even mad about the date change. It was the principle. He went behind my back, hacked into my account, and straight up hijacked my birthday. And everyone was acting like I was overreacting. I told Alex he had 10 minutes to fix it. He just laughed and said, or what? Fine. I logged into Airbnb and canceled the entire reservation. If I wasn't getting my birthday trip, then neither was he. Less than 5 minutes later, my phone was blowing up. Alex was losing his mind. He called me, screaming about how I ruined everything, and now nobody had plans. Our parents jumped in, demanding I rebook because Alex had already invited people. Wait, what? I checked my messages again. A few of my friends had sent me screenshots. Alex had been telling people for weeks that this was his birthday trip. He wasn't just merging our celebrations, he was actively taking over and making it all about himself. I was done. I told everyone that my birthday was still happening this weekend, and that anyone who wanted to celebrate with me was welcome to join. Alex freaked out, saying I was being dramatic. But at that point, the damage was done. Half the group dropped out immediately, refusing to take part in his nonsense. My sister was furious. A few of our mutual friends were pissed that he had lied. Even some extended family members got involved, telling me to just let him have this one because he's been going through a lot. Yeah, no, I wasn't about to let him steal something I put months of planning into. So I started working on a backup plan. And that's when I found out just how deep Alex's plan went. Because this wasn't just some casual switch. Alex had gone all out. He had actual invitations printed. For his birthday. For my trip. At that point, I knew exactly what I had to do. I wasn't just going to fix my birthday plans. I was going to make sure Alex regretted ever trying to steal them. After canceling the Airbnb, the fallout was immediate. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing. The group chat was blowing up. Some people were just now realizing that Alex had changed the date without telling me. Others were furious that I had canceled the whole thing. But the loudest messages? All from Alex. He was losing it. I barely had time to skim the messages before my phone started ringing. I didn't pick up. He called again and again. When I ignored him, he switched to texts, paragraph after paragraph about how I had ruined everything and how everyone was counting on this trip, counting on his stolen trip. Then came the messages from my parents. They weren't asking what happened. They weren't asking why I canceled. They were demanding that I fix it. Apparently, Alex had already invited a bunch of his own friends and extended family to my trip, and now that I had canceled the Airbnb, they had nowhere to go. One message stood out: Alex already planned everything. Just rebook it so he doesn't look bad. I didn't respond. While my phone kept going off, I checked my email and saw the official Airbnb cancellation confirmation. The trip was completely wiped from the system. No one was going. Then, my sister Emily called. Unlike our parents, she actually wanted to know what happened. I told her everything. How Alex had gone behind my back, changed the reservation, and even had printed invitations with his name on them. She was silent for a second. Then she laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was just so typical of him. Emily immediately jumped into the group chat and called him out. The chat exploded. Some people had no idea Alex had changed the plans himself and were now furious at him instead of me. A few mutual friends started bailing completely, saying they wanted nothing to do with the drama. Alex tried to spin it, saying it was his birthday too and that sharing was normal, but the more people realized he had gone behind my back, the worse it got for him. Then he tried to play the victim. He started sending private messages to people, saying I was ruining the family dynamic over one weekend. Screenshots started rolling in. He was telling people I was being selfish, that I was making a big deal out of nothing, that I was always the dramatic one. Emily, being the absolute legend she is, dropped the screenshots in the group chat. At that point, Alex rage quit the chat. Then came the extended family. One of my aunts messaged me, saying Alex had been going through a lot lately, and that I should just let him have this one, let him have this one. He had already hijacked enough of my birthdays as a kid. I wasn't about to let him steal another one just because he was going through something. I told her no. I told everyone no, and then I started planning a backup party. There was no way I was going to let Alex ruin my birthday completely. The Airbnb was gone, but that didn't mean I couldn't celebrate. I started making calls. I found a last-minute event space that wasn't ideal but would work. I made a new guest list, only inviting people I actually trusted. Emily helped spread the word. Then came the final piece of the puzzle. I found out Alex had been planning this takeover for weeks. A mutual friend let it slip that Alex had been talking about his birthday trip since early December. He hadn't just changed the Airbnb last minute, he had been actively making plans to take it over the entire time. That was all the confirmation I needed. I wasn't just throwing a backup party anymore. I was making sure Alex's stolen plans completely fell apart. With the Airbnb officially canceled and Alex scrambling, I moved fast. If he thought he could hijack my plans and walk away with zero consequences, he was in for a wake-up call. I started by locking down a new venue. A friend of mine had a connection at a local event space. Nothing fancy, but it had a bar, music, and enough room for everyone. Best part? It was available this weekend. I put down the deposit immediately and started reaching out to the people I actually wanted there. This time, no family, no extended relatives, no chance of sabotage. Emily was all in. She helped spread the word to the friends we could trust, the ones who had been just as annoyed by Alex's stunt as I was. We kept everything low-key, only messaging people directly. No big announcements, no posts. If my parents or Alex got wind of it, they'd try to shut it down. Meanwhile, Alex's party was falling apart. The day before his takeover trip was supposed to happen, people started dropping out. Some had seen the group chat meltdown and wanted no part in the drama. Others found out the truth, that Alex had stolen my plans and refused to support him. By the end of the night, half of his guest list had bailed. Then came the panic calls. Alex started messaging everyone, trying to figure out why people were canceling. Some ignored him. Others told him straight up that they were going to my party instead. That's when my parents stepped in. First, the texts. Alex worked really hard on this trip. This is getting ridiculous. Just go and make peace. He already invited people. It would be rude not to go. Then, the guilt trip. Mom called, her voice shaking, asking me if I really wanted to tear the family apart over something so small. Dad followed up with a passive-aggressive text, I hope you're happy now. I didn't respond. While they were busy trying to emotionally manipulate me into attending Alex's stolen trip, I was finalizing last-minute details for my real birthday party. And then, the night finally came. I walked into the venue, and it was packed. Music playing, drinks flowing, friends laughing. Everyone who actually cared about me was there, celebrating my birthday the way it was supposed to be. No drama, no tension, just a great time. Meanwhile, Alex's birthday trip was turning into an absolute disaster. A few extended relatives showed up out of obligation, but from what I heard, the whole thing was awkward. People weren't in the mood to celebrate after everything that had gone down. The energy was off. Some left early. And Alex? Livid. I found out later that he had been texting people during his own party, demanding to know why they weren't there. Someone even overheard him ranting about how I had stolen his guests. Oh, the irony. Then, my phone started ringing. Alex. Decline. He called again. Decline. Then came the texts. You ruined everything. You're so selfish. This was supposed to be my weekend. This is why no one likes you. I put my phone on silent and went back to enjoying my birthday. By the time the night ended, I had more messages, this time from family. Alex is really upset. You embarrassed him. You need to fix this. But there were also messages from people who had been at his party saying they didn't blame me at all. Even some extended relatives admitted that Alex had brought this on himself. The final cherry on top? A cousin sent me a picture of Alex at his party. He was sitting alone, drink in hand, looking miserable. Happy birthday, buddy. I didn't respond to a single message. I just sat back, enjoyed my night, and celebrated the fact that for the first time in years, my birthday was truly mine. After my birthday party was a massive success and Alex's stolen event flopped, the aftermath hit fast. My parents went straight into silent treatment mode. No calls, no texts, nothing. It was like they thought if they ignored me long enough, I'd eventually come crawling back, apologizing for ruining the family harmony. That wasn't happening. Meanwhile, Emily kept me updated on what was going on behind the scenes. Alex had been sulking nonstop. For weeks, he was complaining to anyone who would listen about how I had set him up to fail. According to him, I was the one who turned people against him and made him look bad in front of our family. Not the fact that he hijacked my birthday trip, lied about it, and got exposed in front of everyone. Nope, none of that mattered. To him, I was the problem. The same aunt who had originally defended him, telling me to just let him have this one, reached out again. This time, she admitted that Alex had gone too far. Apparently, even she couldn't justify his actions after seeing the group chat meltdown. She told me that a bunch of extended relatives had completely split on the situation. Some thought I had been petty for canceling the Airbnb. Others said I had every right to do what I did. A few even called out my parents for enabling Alex his entire life. But the most interesting part? Some of our childhood friends had started distancing themselves from him. People who had known both of us for years, who had been invited to his trip, started pulling away. Some had witnessed the group chat drama firsthand. Others heard about it through the grapevine. Either way, they decided they didn't want to be around someone who would pull something so shady. Then, out of nowhere, I got an apology. Not from Alex, from my mom. For weeks, my mom avoided the topic, still making excuses for Alex. But eventually, after hearing from multiple relatives and seeing how isolated he had become, she admitted he had gone too far. I don't agree with what he did, she finally said. But then, just as expected, she added, still, don't you think it's time to move on? Let it go? No. I told her flat out, I wasn't playing family mediator anymore. I wasn't going to keep pretending everything was fine just to keep the peace. If Alex wanted to act like nothing happened, that was on him. But I wasn't going to forgive and forget just because it made things easier for everyone else. And surprise, surprise, that's exactly what Alex tried to do. One day, he just started acting like nothing had happened. No apology, no acknowledgement. Just back to sending random memes in the family group chat, pretending everything was normal. I didn't respond. Neither did Emily. I kept my distance, and for the first time in years, I actually enjoyed the peace. No passive-aggressive comments, no unnecessary family drama, just me, my real friends, and the knowledge that I had finally put my foot down. But of course, Alex wasn't done. Since outright confrontation didn't work, he switched tactics. Suddenly, he was acting suspiciously nice. Casual check-ins, friendly small talk, trying to joke around like we were best friends. It was painfully obvious he was trying to work his way back into my good graces. Maybe because he realized he had lost control. Maybe because he noticed people weren't as eager to defend him anymore. Or maybe because, for the first time, he actually faced consequences for his actions. Either way, I wasn't falling for it. Emily and I kept making jokes about it privately, and soon enough, the whole birthday incident became an inside joke among my friends. Anytime someone mentioned making plans, someone would say just make sure Alex doesn't steal them first. At this point, I had completely locked down my future plans. No more open invites. No more trusting family with reservations. Everything private. Everything secure. And if Alex ever tried to pull this again, I just booked my birthday trip to a different continent. Even after everything that happened, the stolen trip, the canceled Airbnb, the failed birthday takeover, Alex still wouldn't let it go. For the next few weeks, he kept up his act, acting overly friendly like nothing had ever happened. Random check-ins, sending funny memes, trying to start casual conversations. It was painfully obvious. He wasn't reaching out because he cared, he was testing the waters. Maybe he thought if he pretended long enough, I'd just forget what he did. Then, the family dinner invitation came. My parents suddenly wanted to get together as a family. No reason, no occasion, just dinner. I knew exactly what this was. A setup. I ignored the invite at first, but my mom started pushing. Then Emily texted me privately, they're trying to make you and Alex work things out. Yeah, not happening. I skipped the dinner. That's when Alex snapped. I was at home, minding my business, when I started getting back-to-back missed calls. Ignored them. Then, a wall of texts came through. Long, ranting paragraphs. He was furious that I didn't show up. Apparently, the whole dinner turned into an intervention about how I needed to forgive and move on. When I didn't show, Alex lost it. He started going on a rant about how I ruined his birthday, turned people against him, and made him look bad. The best part, Emily shut him down on the spot. She flat out told him he did this to himself. And my mom started crying. Because of course she did. At this point, I was so done. I didn't respond. Just let him rant. But then he took it to the group chat. Alex started posting passive-aggressive messages about people who hold grudges over nothing, about how family should come first, about how he was tired of the drama. It was so obvious he was talking about me. So I dropped a single message, nothing? You literally stole my Airbnb reservation. Boom. The chat exploded. Some people laughed. Some people told Alex to drop it already. Others tried to defend him, but they were immediately hit with the receipts. Then Alex made his next mistake. He started DMing people privately, playing the victim. I didn't even have to ask. People started sending me screenshots. He was telling people I was overreacting and ruining the family, and that I should have just let it go. That this was why no one liked me. He really thought people wouldn't tell me. So I dropped the screenshots in the group chat, with one caption, and you wonder why people don't want to be around you. Silence. Then, complete chaos. Some people backed him, saying this shouldn't be public. Others called him out for being a backstabbing liar. A few left the chat completely. Alex went nuclear. He rage quit the chat and blocked me on every social media platform. And me? I sat back, watched the meltdown, and enjoyed the drama-free silence. After Alex rage quit the group chat and blocked me everywhere, I thought that was the end of it. He embarrassed himself, burned bridges with mutual friends, and lost the last bit of sympathy he had left in the family. I was wrong. A few weeks later, something weird happened at work. A coworker casually asked if I was doing okay and if I was facing any legal trouble. Legal trouble? I laughed it off at first, thinking it was just some weird misunderstanding. But then another coworker mentioned hearing a rumor that I was being investigated for fraud. Now I was paying attention. I went straight to my manager, who was just as confused as I was. He pulled me aside and showed me an anonymous email that had been sent to HR. It was a formal complaint accusing me of embezzlement and misusing company resources. HR wouldn't take an anonymous claim seriously, but the email included small, detailed references to internal work procedures, things only someone with inside knowledge could know. At first, HR was obligated to check, but once they saw my clean records, the case was closed immediately. It was detailed enough to raise questions, but vague enough that HR wasn't taking it seriously yet. They were still required to investigate. Luckily, the company took one look at my records and immediately dismissed the claim. But the fact that someone had gone out of their way to make up a whole fraudulent complaint about me? Yeah, that wasn't random. I already had a strong suspicion. Only family knew the details used in the complaint. And only one person in my family was still bitter enough to pull something this stupid. So I set a trap. I texted Alex casually, acting like nothing was wrong. Asked if he had heard any rumors about me. He took the bait immediately. Oh yeah, I heard something crazy. Maybe you should be more careful. Boom, I called him directly. No more games. I asked him straight up if he had sent the email. He freaked out, started stammering, backpedaling, saying he had no idea what I was talking about. Yeah, sure. Later, Emily filled in the missing pieces. Turns out, Alex had been venting to her about how I always got away with things and how he was sick of being the bad guy in the family. He wanted me to face some consequences for embarrassing him, so he took it too far. He didn't think HR would actually investigate, just that it would make me feel the pressure. He genuinely thought he could scare me into backing down. This wasn't birthday drama anymore. This was career sabotage. I was furious. I started looking into defamation laws. I wasn't sure if I had a solid case, but I was seriously considering legal action. Then, my parents finally stepped in. At first, my parents tried to downplay it, saying Alex was just acting out. But when they saw how serious it was, how HR had to investigate, I think even they realized this wasn't something they could brush off. After weeks of silence, they finally admitted that Alex had gone too far and pressured him to apologize. And by apologize, I mean he mumbled out the most pathetic non-apology I've ever heard. Sorry you got so upset. That was it. That was his grand apology after trying to destroy my career. So I gave him one final response. You're dead to me. Don't ever speak to me again. And I meant it. After Alex's pathetic non-apology, I meant it when I said he was dead to me. No more second chances. No more family guilt trips. I was done. And the first real test of that? Christmas. For the first time in my life, I skipped Christmas with my family. Instead, I celebrated with friends, people who actually cared about me and weren't trying to guilt trip me into making peace with someone who tried to sabotage my career. My parents? Absolutely shocked. They didn't think I was serious about cutting Alex off. They thought I was just mad for now and that I'd get over it. I didn't. I ignored every call, every text, every "we miss you" message. And they weren't the only ones feeling the consequences. Because while I was busy enjoying a peaceful holiday, Alex's reputation was crashing and burning. Word had spread. People who had still been on the fence about the whole birthday fiasco started hearing the full story. Mutual friends found out about the fake HR complaint. Extended family started whispering about how Alex had taken things too far. And people started pulling away from him. At first, some friends still stuck around, believing his side of the story. But as time went on and more people heard about his behavior, from the birthday stunt to the HR sabotage, his invites started to dry up. Some still hung out with him but kept him at a distance, while others gradually cut him off completely. Turns out, nobody likes a guy who sabotages his own brother's career over a birthday trip. And then karma hit hard. Alex lost his job. From what Emily told me, Alex had been slacking at work for months. He started missing deadlines, showing up late, and spending more time venting about his family drama than actually working. When layoffs hit, his name was at the top of the list. And what did Alex do? He blamed me. Told family that I manifested bad luck for him. Yeah, sure. I forced him to be a lazy, incompetent employee. At this point, even my parents were starting to struggle to defend him. And Emily? Still fully on my side. Every time our parents tried to push for a reunion, she shut it down. She wasn't going to play peacemaker. She wasn't going to pretend like I was the problem. Then came my parents' final attempt. They begged me to at least talk to Alex for their sake. So I asked a simple question: if someone tried to sabotage your job, would you forgive them? Silence. For the first time, they had no excuse. No, he's your brother. No, let it go. They finally stopped pressuring me. Months passed. No contact. No drama. It was amazing. Then, out of nowhere, Alex sent a long, dramatic email. Some grand attempt at a reconciliation. I didn't even read it. Just deleted it. Then, I blocked him everywhere. No contact. No drama. Total peace. And you know what? Life is so much better without him in it. A full year has passed since Alex tried to hijack my birthday, got exposed, lost his friends, and even sabotaged himself out of a job. And you know what? Life without him has been amazing. No more last-minute family drama. No more group chat explosions. No more dealing with his entitled nonsense. Just peace. So, for my birthday this year, I decided to go even bigger. New location. Better guest list. Zero chance of sabotage. I booked a private villa in another state, locked in reservations early, and only invited people I actually trust. No family. No mutuals who might leak info. Just my closest friends and Emily. And of course, Alex still found a way to be a problem. A week before my birthday, mutual friends started getting weird messages from Alex. Nothing direct. Just casual check-ins where he suddenly wanted to know if they were doing anything cool this weekend. Subtle. Too bad I was already 10 steps ahead. No one gave him details, because no one invited to my trip still talks to him. So what does Alex do when he can't find out where I'm going? Cue my parents. Out of nowhere, I start getting messages he's still your brother. It's been a year. Don't you think it's time to move on? You're tearing the family apart. Yeah, I wasn't playing this game again. I shut it down immediately. Told them I was done with Alex for good. And that's when he finally snapped. I woke up to a 3-paragraph text from a number I barely recognized. It was Alex. His message? A long, dramatic rant about how I had ruined the family, how I turned everyone against him, and how I was holding a grudge over nothing. Nothing? He literally stole my birthday, tried to destroy my job, and got himself fired because he was too busy being a petty loser. I didn't even bother responding. Just screenshotted it for Emily and moved on with my life. And let me tell you, this birthday was my best one yet. The villa? Gorgeous. The people? All real friends. The drama? Non-existent. For the first time in years, I had a birthday where I didn't have to deal with my brother's nonsense. But of course, Alex wasn't done embarrassing himself. Since he couldn't reach me directly, Alex took his sob story to Facebook. He made a long post about how some people hold grudges for no reason, and how he just wanted his family back. Classic victim playing. And the best part, people weren't buying it. The comments dragged him. Mutual friends started calling him out, reminding him exactly what he did last year. Some just laughed and dropped popcorn emojis. Even some extended family members were done defending him. And just like that, he deleted the post. That moment made something very clear to me. Some family members will always take Alex's side, but I don't need those people in my life. So I distanced myself from them, too. I don't have time for people who enable someone who tried to ruin my life just because he didn't get his way. Life without Alex? Incredible. My career is thriving. No more distractions, no sabotage attempts, just success. My friendships are stronger than ever. No fake friends, no drama, just real support. I'm happier than I've ever been. And I finally realized something: I don't hold grudges. I hold boundaries. So guess what? Alex finally got the message. After a full year of being ignored, losing his friends, getting publicly dragged on Facebook, and watching me thrive without him, he did the one thing I didn't see coming. He moved away. That's right. After struggling to find stable work and realizing most of his old social circles had moved on, he decided to leave. Some relatives said he wanted a fresh start, but I suspect he was just trying to outrun his reputation. From what Emily heard, he told some relatives that he needed a fresh start and that this place was full of fake people. Translation: everyone knows he's a lying, backstabbing clown, and no one wants to deal with him anymore. But let's rewind, because this gets better. The moment we heard Alex was officially leaving, my friends, being the absolute legends they are, decided to celebrate. Nothing major, just a small get-together where we jokingly toasted to new beginnings. Someone even brought a cake that said good riddance on it. Petty? Yes. Deserved? Absolutely. Meanwhile, my parents were still holding out hope for some grand emotional goodbye. They actually asked if I wanted to see him one last time before he left. Yeah, no, the last thing I needed was to hear one final sob story about how I ruined his life by refusing to let him steal my birthday. So I skipped the farewell tour. And Alex, completely isolated. Even his closest friends dropped him. The people who had once blindly defended him, gone. The mutuals who tried to stay neutral, they moved on. And the relatives who kept making excuses for him, they got sick of his pity party. He was completely alone. With Alex out of my life, things only got better. My career is skyrocketing. No drama, no distractions, just success. I'm in a happy relationship. Turns out, cutting off toxic people makes room for healthy ones. My friendships are stronger than ever. No one's walking on eggshells anymore. And I have zero regrets. For my next birthday, I did something incredibly petty, but also incredibly satisfying. I booked the exact same Airbnb Alex tried to steal. Same place, same weekend, same vibe. And this time, no sabotage, just me, my closest friends, and an amazing drama-free celebration. And yes, I posted plenty of pictures, which of course Alex saw. A few days later, Emily sent me screenshots. Alex had lost it on social media. Some long, dramatic rant about how some people just love holding onto grudges and how family should be more important than petty revenge. Dude, you tried to ruin my career? And the best part? People called him out again. His post got buried in comments from people reminding him what he did. Some just straight up laughed at him. Others dropped popcorn emojis. And just like last time, he deleted the post. Alex will probably never admit he was wrong. He'll probably never apologize for what he did. And he'll probably never understand why everyone cut him off. But here's what I learned: just because someone is family doesn't mean you have to keep them in your life. Some people never change. But that doesn't mean you have to let them stay in your life. So, yeah, goodbye, Alex, and good riddance. I'm a 30-year-old guy, and up until a few years ago, I was doing all right. Not great, not terrible, just getting by. That all changed the night my older brother, Daniel, handed me the so-called gift that ruined my life. It happened during a family dinner at my parents' house. One of those big, exhausting gatherings where everyone talks over each other, and my mom keeps shoving more food on my plate no matter how many times I say I'm full. Daniel had been acting weird all night, overly cheerful, clapping people on the back, cracking jokes like he was in the best mood of his life. Then, out of nowhere, he stands up, clinks his glass, and makes an announcement. He says he wants to do something special for me, that I've always worked hard and deserved a break. Then he pulls out a folder and slides it across the table. It's a property deed. My name is already on it. Daniel grins like he just handed me the winning lottery ticket. He tells me he's gifting me an old business property he no longer needs. A stepping stone to success. According to him, it's a prime location with tons of potential. I could turn it into anything. A rental space, an office, whatever I wanted. The room erupts into applause. My parents beam at him like he's a saint. My aunts and uncles start chiming in about what a generous brother I have. Someone even suggests taking a family photo to commemorate the moment. Meanwhile, I'm sitting there staring at the deed, trying to process why Daniel would suddenly hand me a commercial property. See, Daniel isn't the type to just give things away. He's always been flashy, always bragging about his latest big move, but he also has a long history of bad financial decisions. He jumps into things without thinking, then disappears when it's time to deal with the consequences. So yeah, I was skeptical. I ask him why he's giving it up. He waves it off, says he's moved on to bigger things, that this place is too small for his future plans. I press him a little more, but he just laughs and tells me not to overthink it. By this point, everyone is watching me, waiting for me to say something. What was I supposed to do? Hand it back and look ungrateful? Insist I didn't want it and get hit with the whole Daniel is being generous, and you're ruining the moment routine? I didn't have much of a choice. So, I thanked him, smiled, took the damn papers. The next morning, I drove out to see the place. It was a disaster. The building looked abandoned, cracked windows, graffiti on the walls, weeds growing through the pavement. The sign out front was half fallen, and the front door had a padlock on it. Inside, it was worse. Water damage everywhere, mold creeping up the walls, a ceiling panel missing in one of the rooms. There were piles of trash in the corners, like squatters had been in and out. And then I noticed something even worse, stacks of old letters shoved under the door. I picked one up. It was a debt collection notice. Then another, and another. At that point, I knew I was screwed, but I had to be sure. I drove straight to the county office and asked about the property's financials. The clerk pulled up the records, and the second she glanced at the screen, she winced. Unpaid property taxes, code violations, liens, foreclosure warnings. The total amount? Tens of thousands in debt. I left the office in a daze. The moment I got back to my car, I called Daniel. He dodged my first call, and the second, and the third. Finally, I sent him a text. "What the hell did you give me?" His response? "You'll figure it out. Just flip it. Flip it." Like I could just slap a coat of paint on it and call it a day. I tried explaining the situation to my parents, hoping they'd talk sense into him. Instead, they doubled down. My dad shrugged and said I should be grateful for the opportunity. My mom told me Daniel had meant well, and that I needed to stop making a fuss. That was just the beginning. Within a week, the debt collectors started calling. Apparently, when Daniel transferred the property to me, every financial issue attached to it became my problem. I contacted a lawyer, praying there was some way out of it, but it wasn't that simple. Undoing a legal transfer like this required proving fraud or coercion, neither of which I could easily do. Meanwhile, Daniel had gone radio silent. No answers, no explanations, just vanished. The financial weight started crushing me fast. I had a stable job, but I wasn't making nearly enough to handle the mess he dumped on me. My rent started slipping behind. Bills piled up. I took on extra shifts, tried everything I could to stay afloat, but it wasn't enough. When I finally tracked Daniel down at a family gathering and confronted him in person, he laughed. Actually laughed. "Not my problem," he said. "You could have said no." I walked out before I lost it. The next few months were brutal. No matter what I did, I couldn't dig myself out. I fought to keep up with payments, but the numbers just kept getting worse. And then I hit rock bottom. I lost my apartment, packed everything I owned into my car, and moved into a tiny rundown rental I could barely afford. All thanks to Daniel's gift. And that was just the start. After months of drowning in debt, dodging calls from collectors, and working myself into exhaustion just to keep my head above water, I had to face reality. There was no way out. I sat in a lawyer's office, staring at the paperwork in front of me. Bankruptcy. My only option. Signing those papers felt like admitting defeat. Everything I had worked for, everything I had struggled to build, was wiped away because of a gift I never even asked for. But at that point, I didn't have a choice. The debt from the property was unmanageable, and I was on the verge of losing everything else. Filing for bankruptcy didn't just clear the debts tied to the property, it also meant my credit was destroyed. No loans, no new apartment applications, no chance at financial stability for years. I walked out of the lawyer's office with my stomach in knots, knowing that even though I had stopped the immediate bleeding, the damage Daniel had done would follow me for a long time. Daniel, on the other hand, was completely unbothered. When I finally managed to corner him at another family event and laid it all out, how the property had buried me, how I had no way to recover, he laughed. Actually laughed. He leaned back, shrugged, and told me I should have done better research before accepting. Like I had been the one who tricked myself into taking on a nightmare. My parents, of course, took his side. My mom sighed and said I was being too dramatic, that I should be grateful Daniel had tried to help me. My dad mumbled something about how business is business, and that maybe I should have just sold the place instead of getting myself into trouble. But then, my aunt hesitated, shifting uncomfortably. Still, Daniel should have been upfront about the debt. she muttered. For a second, I thought maybe, just maybe, someone in my family would hold him accountable. But my parents ignored her, brushing past the reality they didn't want to face. No one wanted to hear how impossible that had been. It didn't sit right. The way Daniel had dumped the property on me so suddenly, how fast he disappeared after, how little remorse he showed, it felt planned. I started digging. I requested the full records of the property's ownership history. When I got the documents back, my stomach dropped. Daniel had transferred it to me days before multiple foreclosure warnings hit. The moment I saw that, everything clicked. He knew. He had known all along. This wasn't some failed attempt at generosity. This wasn't bad luck. He had dumped a sinking ship on me right before it officially went under. I took the paperwork straight to another lawyer. This time I wanted real answers. Was there any way I could undo this? Could I take legal action? The lawyer flipped through the documents and frowned. He said Daniel's actions could absolutely be considered fraudulent transfer, but suing family was complicated. It would be expensive, messy, and even if I won, recovering damages could take years. That night, I was scrolling through social media when I saw something that made my blood boil. Daniel had just bought a new car, not a used one, not something cheap. Brand new, straight off the lot. It didn't make sense until I remembered how he operated. He was probably financing everything on credit, banking on another shady deal to keep himself afloat. 2 days later, I saw another post. He was on vacation, drinking cocktails on a beach, most likely on borrowed money, while I could barely afford food. That was it. I was done being the idiot everyone expected to roll over and take the hit. Then, out of nowhere, someone reached out to me. It was a guy named Marcus, Daniel's former business partner. We had never met, but he had heard through mutual connections what had happened. His message was short. "You're not the first person he did this to. Call me." I met up with Marcus the next day. Turns out, Daniel had been trying to offload that property for years. He had even tried to sell it to a stranger for dirt cheap. But the guy ran a background check and backed out. The moment Daniel realized he couldn't get rid of it legally, he dumped it on me instead. I sat there staring at Marcus, barely able to believe what I was hearing. He shook his head and told me Daniel had always been like this. Burning bridges, leaving others to clean up his mess, and somehow walking away without a scratch. The weight of everything crashed down at once. The financial mess, the humiliation, my parents' refusal to hold him accountable. It was all intentional. I didn't eat for 2 days after that. The stress had completely taken over my body. My best friend noticed how bad things had gotten, and without telling me, started a GoFundMe to help me recover. I couldn't bring myself to share it. I was too ashamed. I felt like if I accepted help, it would make me look even weaker. But people started donating anyway. Strangers who had heard my story, people who had been screwed over before. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep me afloat for another month. Meanwhile, my relatives had started whispering. The family gossip mill kicked into full gear, but instead of blaming Daniel, they blamed me. I was bad with money. I didn't handle things right. I should have just sold it and moved on. It was easier for them to believe that than to admit that their golden boy was a fraud. I wasn't done yet. One last time, I confronted Daniel. I laid out everything. The proof, the records, Marcus's testimony. I told him he needed to take responsibility. He smirked and told me, "That's life. Grow up." I walked out of that room knowing one thing. Daniel thought he had won. I went straight to my uncle, one of the only people in the family who had never liked Daniel. I told him everything, and he didn't even hesitate. He offered to connect me with his lawyer. The next day, I met with my uncle's lawyer, a guy who had handled some tricky business cases before. He warned me that suing Daniel wasn't going to be easy. "It's expensive, and he'll try to drag it out," he said. But I had one advantage. My uncle offered to cover my legal fees until we won. That was all I needed. That night, I got a text from him. "Good luck proving anything. Challenge accepted." A week after filing the lawsuit, I came home to find an envelope wedged in my mailbox. It was thick, heavy, and had a law firm's name printed across the top. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. Daniel had lawyered up. Inside was his official response. A legal attempt to dismiss the case entirely. His lawyer claimed that I had willingly accepted the property, and that Daniel could not be held responsible for any issues that came with it. They painted it like I had eagerly taken the gift and then regretted it later, twisting the narrative to make it seem like this was all my fault. I took the documents straight to my lawyer, who skimmed through them and sighed. This wasn't going to be an easy fight. Daniel had hired a very expensive, very aggressive legal team, the kind that buries people in paperwork and delays cases until the other side either runs out of money or gives up. That wasn't going to happen. The lawsuit sent shockwaves through the family. My parents called me the moment they heard, demanding to know why I was dragging the family into court instead of just working things out privately. My mom begged me to drop it, saying that family doesn't do this to each other. My dad called it an embarrassment. A few relatives outright called me a traitor, but others started whispering. Daniel had always been the golden child, but people were starting to talk about how convenient it was that he dumped the property on me right before the foreclosure notices hit. The cracks in his perfect image were beginning to show. I doubled down on gathering evidence. Through county records, I found proof that Daniel had received multiple foreclosure warnings before signing the property over to me. He hadn't just been trying to offload a bad investment. He had been trying to escape total financial ruin by throwing me under the bus. Then a cousin reached out. They had messages, screenshots of Daniel bragging in a group chat months before he gave me the property. He had laughed about getting rid of that dump and sticking someone else with the problem. Someone asked him why he didn't just sell it, and he responded with no one's dumb enough to buy it, but my brother is too nice to say no. I forwarded everything to my lawyer. This was the smoking gun. At this point, I had nothing left to lose. I was already broke, my credit was shot, my family was divided. What more could he take from me? So I did something I never thought I'd do. I posted everything online, not just vague complaints. I posted screenshots, documents, foreclosure notices, and receipts. I explained how Daniel had knowingly dumped a financial disaster on me and left me to drown. It started gaining traction online. At first, just a handful of people commented, some old classmates, a few business contacts who had always found Daniel sketchy. But then, one of his former investors chimed in. I had a bad experience with him too. That's when the floodgates opened. More and more people shared their stories, and before long, Daniel's reputation wasn't just bruised, it was in freefall. His reputation, which had always been spotless, was suddenly on fire, and then something unexpected happened. Strangers started donating to help me. At first, it was small, $5 here, $10 there. Then bigger donations started rolling in. People who had been through similar betrayals, people who hated scammers, even people who just wanted to see karma play out pitched in to help me survive. Daniel must have seen the backlash, because within days I started receiving threats. Anonymous messages warning me to back off, and that I was ruining my own life. Some were obvious trolls, but a few felt personal. The timing was too perfect. I had no proof it was Daniel's friends, but I wouldn't have been surprised. Then came the first court hearing. It was just a preliminary meeting, but the judge was not impressed with Daniel's side. My lawyer presented the foreclosure warnings, the text messages, and the transfer records. The judge looked straight at Daniel's lawyer and asked, "Did your client knowingly give his brother a property in financial distress without disclosing it?" His lawyer tried to deflect. The judge cut him off. "Answer the question." Daniel's lawyer stumbled through some excuse, but the damage was done. The judge ruled that the case would move forward and told Daniel's side to prepare for a full trial. Things only got worse for Daniel after that. A local journalist reached out to me. They had seen my post online and wanted to do a story on fraud within families. I wasn't sure if I wanted to go that far, but the thought of putting more pressure on Daniel, that was tempting. Then, out of nowhere, Daniel sent me a text. "Can we talk?" It was the first time he had directly reached out since the lawsuit began. Not to apologize, not to make things right, just, "Can we talk?" I ignored it. The next day, his lawyer reached out to mine. They were offering a settlement. It was insultingly low. Barely enough to cover even half the damages I had taken on. A slap in the face. I told my lawyer we weren't settling. Daniel thought I was bluffing. I wasn't. If he wanted to play dirty, he had picked the wrong brother to mess with. The lawsuit had barely begun, but my parents were already in full panic mode. They called an emergency family meeting at their house, claiming we needed to fix this before it's too late. When I arrived, most of the family was already there. My parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, and of course Daniel. He sat at the dining table like nothing was wrong, scrolling through his phone like this was just another Sunday dinner. The moment I stepped inside, my mom launched into a plea. The usual speech, how family shouldn't fight, how this was tearing us apart, how she couldn't handle seeing her sons like this. Then my dad chimed in, saying lawsuits were ugly and not worth destroying the family over. They wanted me to drop it. I told them the truth. Daniel destroyed this family the moment he dumped that property on me. There was no fixing this. I wasn't backing down. For the first time since this all started, Daniel actually looked nervous. He scoffed, muttered something under his breath, but I could see it. He wasn't as confident as before. The lawsuit was real, and now the whole family was involved. Then my aunt dropped a bombshell. She had overheard Daniel bragging to a friend months ago that I'd never have the guts to actually sue him, that I'd cry about it, but eventually let it go. The room went dead silent. Daniel's face turned red. He immediately tried to brush it off, but it was too late. The damage was done. Then my mother played her final card. She wiped her tears and said if I didn't drop the lawsuit, they'd have to choose between their sons. I didn't even hesitate. I told them to go ahead and choose. That shut everyone up real fast. The family left that night more divided than ever. Some people were fully on my side, disgusted by Daniel's actions. Others believed his version, that I was blowing things out of proportion and just trying to ruin his life over a bad investment. Daniel, meanwhile, went on the offensive. Mutual friends started distancing themselves. I found out he was telling people that I was money hungry and that I was suing him because I was jealous of his success. He made himself sound like the victim, painting me as some bitter, broke sibling trying to cash in. That narrative didn't last long. My lawyer dug up another name, someone else Daniel had scammed. This guy, Ryan, had gone into business with Daniel years ago. Daniel drained their shared account and left him in debt. Ryan never took legal action because Daniel had talked his way out of it. But when he heard I was suing, he offered to testify. Meanwhile, Daniel's lawyer was getting desperate. I received a counterclaim. They were now arguing that I had agreed to the property transfer and all of its conditions. Basically, they were trying to make it look like I willingly took on the debt, knowing what I was getting into. My lawyer shut that down immediately. We submitted all the evidence. The foreclosure warnings, the fraudulent timing of the transfer, the texts of Daniel laughing about it. It was clear Daniel had knowingly tricked me. Then came the first big court ruling. Daniel's lawyer tried to dismiss the case entirely, arguing that it was a family dispute that didn't belong in court. The judge denied the motion. That meant the lawsuit was going to trial. That night, I got a text from Daniel. Long, angry, unhinged. He ranted about how I was ruining his life over a stupid building. He threw in a few insults, a few guilt trips, and ended it with, "Hope you're happy." I didn't respond, but the internet did. My post about the lawsuit blew up even more. More people started calling out Daniel, exposing other shady things he had done in the past. His name was getting dragged through the mud, and suddenly his successful businessman image wasn't looking so polished anymore. Then I got another interesting piece of news. Daniel's legal fees were piling up. The expensive lawyer, the failed attempts to dismiss the case, the constant back and forth, it was all draining him financially, and for the first time I saw real cracks in his arrogance. A week later, the court ordered Daniel to hand over his financial records. He had been avoiding it, trying to stall, but the judge forced his hand. I had won my first real victory. And Daniel, he wasn't laughing anymore. The court ordered Daniel to turn over his financial records, and when my lawyer got a look at them, everything fell into place. It wasn't just that he knew the property was a disaster, he had been actively trying to hide how bad it was. The records showed that Daniel had received multiple foreclosure notices months before he gave it to me, and he had made several failed attempts to sell it before dumping it in my lap. He knew exactly what he was doing. When Daniel's lawyer saw how bad this looked, they immediately tried to settle again. This time, the offer was higher, enough to clear a portion of my debt, but still nowhere near what I had lost. I refused. Then my parents made one last attempt to guilt trip me. Daniel was struggling too, they said. But this time, my mother's voice wavered. She wasn't as confident in her defense of him as before. My father sighed, rubbing his forehead. He screwed up, all right, but family forgives. It was the closest either of them had come to admitting Daniel was at fault, but it wasn't enough. Not anymore. The hypocrisy was almost funny. When I was struggling, they told me to figure it out. When Daniel was feeling the heat, suddenly it was a family crisis. Then the official notice arrived. The trial date was set. In a few months we were going to court. That's when Daniel started getting desperate. Mutual friends told me he was trying to sell off assets to cover his legal fees. His expensive car, gone. His high-end apartment, listed for rent. Then out of nowhere, I got a text from Daniel. I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Can we just talk? I ignored it. Word was spreading and people were finally seeing him for who he really was. More people started distancing themselves. Old friends, business contacts, even some family members who had supported him at first. Then a former coworker reached out to me. Someone who had worked with Daniel years ago. He had a story to tell. Daniel had done something similar before. Not with property, but with business debts. He had partnered with someone on a startup, drained the company's funds, and left his partner drowning in expenses while he walked away clean. That partner had never taken legal action. But now, they were willing to testify. My lawyer was thrilled. Then Daniel's lawyer reached out again. This time, the settlement offer was significantly higher. Still not enough. Then came the first real legal blow. Daniel had been withholding financial disclosures, trying to avoid showing how much money he actually had. The judge caught on and fined him immediately. That's when things started unraveling. His business had already been struggling. Small deals falling through, suppliers pulling back, whispers of missed payments. The lawsuit just put it all under a microscope. And then I found out something even worse. A cousin who had pretended to be supportive had been feeding information to Daniel the whole time, trying to help him salvage his sinking ship. I cut him off immediately. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A name I had seen before, but never paid attention to. Resurfaced. Ryan, one of Daniel's former business partners, had been burned by him years ago. I had heard his name in passing, but now he was reaching out. He had the receipts, proof of how Daniel had pulled the same stunt on him. My lawyer took one look and said, "This changes everything." They had been in business with Daniel years ago and had documents proving his shady financial dealings. My lawyer looked over everything and told me, "Hold your ground. We've got him." That same night, I got a panicked voicemail from Daniel. "We need to fix this before it's too late." I smirked. Daniel finally knew he was screwed. The trial was finally underway, and Daniel walked into the courtroom looking confident, wearing an expensive suit and flashing his usual smug grin. It didn't last long. From the moment he was questioned, he made his biggest mistake. Under oath, Daniel outright lied. He claimed he had no idea about the massive debt attached to the property before transferring it to me, that he thought it was a fair deal, and that I was exaggerating how bad it was. My lawyer didn't even blink. He slid a stack of documents across the table, emails, foreclosure notices, property debt reports, all addressed to Daniel months before he handed the property over to me. The judge's face hardened. Daniel's lawyer immediately tried to backpedal, claiming Daniel had been misinformed and that his memory was foggy on the details, but it was too late. The judge was already suspicious. Then the key witness took the stand. Daniel's former business partner testified that this wasn't an accident. Daniel had tried to dump the property on multiple people before me. He had even offered it to an investor for pennies on the dollar, but when they asked for financial records, they backed out immediately. He had known exactly what he was doing. For the first time, I saw actual fear on Daniel's face. His jaw clenched, his eyes darted around the room, and he kept whispering to his lawyer. The confidence, completely gone. Then came the biggest shift yet. Daniel's lawyer pulled my lawyer aside during recess. Their new offer? A full settlement, enough to completely erase my debt and compensate me for damages. My lawyer told me this was the win we needed. If I took it, I'd be free. No more debt, no more court battles. I wasn't so sure. Letting Daniel walk away without real consequences didn't sit right. Then my parents showed up. They begged me to take the money and walk away. They weren't worried about me getting justice. They were worried about Daniel losing everything. I wasn't feeling particularly sympathetic. While they were trying to protect Daniel, he was spiraling. Word spread that he had been having meltdowns behind the scenes, ranting to anyone who would listen about how I was ruining his life and how the lawsuit was unfair. Mutual friends started dropping him. People who once stood by him finally saw through his lies. Then Daniel tried one last manipulation. I got a message from him. "You've made your point. Let's just be brothers again." I didn't even respond. At the next hearing, the judge didn't hold back. He reprimanded Daniel for his behavior, stating that it was clear he had acted in bad faith. He wasn't fooled by the excuses, and Daniel's case was falling apart fast. That's when Daniel's lawyer made the final offer, a lump sum that would clear my financial struggles completely and compensate me for damages, a full payout. But I had one condition. Daniel had to admit it. In writing, I wanted a signed statement from him admitting he knowingly burdened me with financial ruin. At first, he refused, but when his lawyer explained that without the settlement, the case would go to trial and he would *** lose even more money. ***, he finally gave in. With shaking hands, Daniel signed. And just like that, it was over. With the settlement money, I paid off all my debts. I moved into a real home. I rebuilt my credit. Meanwhile, Daniel's life crumbled. His reputation was in the gutter. His business suffered. He was no longer the golden child. And for the first time, he had no one left to manipulate. After the settlement was finalized, I did something I hadn't been able to do in years. I breathed. The first thing I did was wipe out every last cent of debt that Daniel had dumped on me. Watching those balances drop to zero felt surreal. The weight that had been sitting on my chest for so long was finally gone. I moved into a better place, something comfortable and safe, nothing extravagant, just a home that was actually mine. No more stress, no more dodging collectors. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't constantly looking over my shoulder. Daniel, on the other hand, his life was falling apart. Mutual friends told me his business was collapsing. Clients were dropping him, and new deals were falling through left and right. The lawsuit had put his shady reputation under a microscope, and no one wanted to work with him anymore. But my parents, they still refused to acknowledge that Daniel had done anything wrong. They acted like the whole lawsuit was some unfortunate accident, something we should all just move on from. They didn't want to talk about the fact that their golden child was a liar and a fraud. Meanwhile, Daniel's social life was crumbling. Friends he had known for years, gone. Business contacts, avoiding him. The same people who once laughed at his jokes and hyped up his success were now distancing themselves as his reputation sank like a rock. Then, out of nowhere, I got a text. "I guess I should have handled things differently. Hope you're happy now." A half-hearted apology. No ownership, no real remorse, just a weak attempt to save face. I didn't even bother responding. I wasn't the only one ignoring him. Then came the next twist. I got a message from an old friend. Apparently Daniel was being investigated for fraud. Not because of me. Apparently, after my lawsuit, other people started speaking up. People Daniel had scammed, manipulated, or conned over the years. Someone must have filed a complaint, because now, authorities were looking into his past business deals. Karma was hitting him hard. But instead of taking responsibility, Daniel flipped the script. I heard through the family grapevine that he was telling people I ruined his life, that I had taken everything from him, that he was the real victim in all of this. Nobody was buying it. Then, another unexpected turn. A cousin reached out. One of the same cousins who had taken Daniel's side at the start. They admitted they had been manipulated, that Daniel had fed them lies about what happened. They apologized. I didn't hold a grudge, but I wasn't about to trust them again either. Daniel, meanwhile, tried to rebuild. He started a new business venture, some vague startup that never really took off. Word spread too fast. His reputation was already in the gutter. Investors weren't interested. Former clients wanted nothing to do with him. Then, for the first time, my dad finally admitted something, not publicly, not in front of anyone else, but in a rare private moment, he muttered that Daniel brought this on himself. Of course, he still wouldn't say it out loud to the family. He still wanted to pretend that everything was fine. Then Daniel did something pathetic. He went on social media and started ranting about family betrayal and how some people destroy their own blood over money. He didn't name names, but everyone knew who he was talking about. I ignored it. I had moved on. And while Daniel was spiraling, my life was getting better. I landed a better job. No longer weighed down by debt, I could actually focus on my future instead of just trying to survive. Then, one last act of desperation. Daniel reached out again. He wanted to fix things. I blocked him. For the first time, Daniel was the one struggling while I was thriving, and he never saw it coming. A year had passed since the lawsuit ended, and for the first time in ages, my life was completely peaceful. I had cleared my debts, moved into a comfortable home, and cut off most of the toxic family members who had spent more time defending Daniel than acknowledging the damage he had done. Work was going great, my finances were stable, and I had finally built a life where I didn't have to constantly worry about what disaster was coming next. Daniel, on the other hand, his world had completely fallen apart. I heard through the grapevine that his business had officially collapsed. Clients had walked away, investors wouldn't touch him, and the fraud investigation had killed whatever remaining credibility he had left. He had piled up so much debt trying to keep everything afloat that now he had nothing. Then, out of nowhere, my parents reached out. They had finally started to realize how bad things had gotten for Daniel, but instead of acknowledging that he had caused this himself, they tried to guilt me into making things right. They wanted me to reach out to him. To what? Offer him money, help him rebuild. Pretend none of this ever happened. I refused. Apparently, Daniel's situation was even worse than I thought. His car had been repossessed. He had moved into a tiny apartment, and most of his so-called friends had abandoned him. The people who used to laugh at his jokes and praise his business moves were now avoiding him like the plague. Then came the ultimate betrayal. I got a notification from my bank about an attempted loan application in my name. I hadn't applied for anything. I called my bank immediately, and after verifying some details, they confirmed that someone had tried to take out a loan using my identity, and the person who attempted it, Daniel, he had actually tried to steal from me again. I didn't waste time. I went straight to my lawyer and contacted the bank to ensure the fraud attempt was blocked. Then, I went to my parents. I told them everything, that their precious son had tried to steal my identity, that he was still the same manipulative liar, that he hadn't changed at all. And still, they tried to downplay it. It was a misunderstanding. Daniel was just desperate. I was taking things too far. That was the moment I realized they were never going to change. No matter what Daniel did, no matter how low he sank, they would always find a way to excuse him. Daniel, of course, had an excuse ready when I finally confronted him. It was just a mistake. He was just seeing what options were available. I was overreacting. I didn't care what he had to say. I filed a police report to ensure he would never try this again. That was the final straw for my mother. For years, she had been defending Daniel, excusing him, playing peacekeeper. But when she realized there was no way to spin this, that Daniel had actively tried to commit fraud against his own brother, she finally admitted it. He was out of control. She cried. My dad went silent, but I was done feeling sorry for them. Later that night, Daniel snapped. I got a long, furious message from him, blaming me for ruining his life. That I had taken everything from him. That he was the real victim. That I was cold and heartless for turning on my own brother. I blocked him permanently. Not long after, his fraud attempt showed up on his record. Any chance he had at rebuilding? Gone. His business? Dead. His reputation? Destroyed. The family? Completely fractured. I knew I might never fully repair things with my parents, but I was done being manipulated. I wasn't responsible for Daniel. I never was. And now, for the first time in my life, I was finally free. After filing the police report, blocking Daniel, and completely cutting him out of my life, I figured that was the end of it. For once, I didn't have to think about him. No more disasters, no more lies, no more manipulation. Then one day, I heard something strange from a cousin. Daniel had disappeared. Apparently, he had cut off all contact with most of the family, vanished from social media, and wasn't answering calls. His usual arrogance, his habit of posting about his big business moves, his constant need for attention, all of it was gone. At first, I assumed he was just laying low after the fraud investigation, and the lawsuit ruined his reputation. No one wanted to work with him. His business had failed, and he had nothing left. But part of me also knew Daniel wasn't the type to just accept his losses. Then years passed. I moved on completely. I built a successful career, surrounded myself with real friends, and focused on my own life instead of the mess Daniel had tried to drag me into. Until, out of nowhere, I got an email. The sender? Daniel. After 10 years of silence. The email was long, dramatic, over the top, filled with regret. He wrote about how he finally understood the pain he had caused, that he knew he had made mistakes, that losing his business, his friends, and his reputation had changed him. He said he had been struggling, that he had lost everything. I have no one left, he wrote. Then he asked for something. A second chance. He wanted to make things right. He wanted to meet, to talk about the past, to rebuild what we lost. I didn't even hesitate. Hell no. I had no interest in reopening that chapter of my life. I wasn't even sure if he was being honest. Had he really changed, or was this just another manipulation attempt? A few days later, my mother called. She had heard from Daniel too. She told me he was in a dark place, that he was struggling financially and emotionally, that he had no one left to turn to. She begged me to talk to him. Then I got a message from an old friend. Be careful, He's only reaching out because he needs money. That was all I needed to hear. I never replied to Daniel's email. I blocked him. For good. A few weeks later, I saw a vague post on social media. Daniel had reappeared, posting about forgiveness and family turning their backs. No names, no details, but the message was clear. He wanted people to feel sorry for him. I didn't care. For the first time in years, I felt nothing. No anger, no frustration, just peace. My life was stable, happy, drama-free, and Daniel. He was left alone, facing the consequences of his own actions.